Surgically wiping out a room full of hopeless dorks in 2 seconds flat, only to realize you accidentally vaporized 3 hostages in the process, is Ready or Not at its absolute peak. Unlike most first-person shooters that have you bunny hopping around like a schizophrenic grasshopper on crack, this game dares to slow things down to a screeching halt and blend methodical, unforgiving gameplay with an incredibly gritty and uncompromising narrative. But behind all the sublime tactical tension lies a game burdened by a studio hell-bent on asking one singular question. What if, now hear me out on this one, what if we sold out just a little bit more? Well, the reason people keep letting them get away with that question is because, at its core, it's straight up an incredibly fun game to play, plain and simple. There are no flashy bells or whistles here, and Ready or Not stands on the merits of its gameplay alone, with a core action loop constantly fluctuating between 2 states, tense and intense. It's the delicate harmony between those 2 states combined with the punishing nature of the game that makes it such a compelling experience to begin with. And running in guns blazing without any knowledge of what's ahead is a surefire way to get your ass handed to you. Thankfully though, it's not just suffering slop, and that patience and scrutiny is often greatly rewarded with some of the most intense and exhilarating encounters you'll ever have. To put things in perspective, I'm what the ancient Aztecs would describe as being absolute ass at first-person shooters, but thanks to how much the game encourages careful preparation and tactical thinking, even I managed to feel like an unstoppable force of nature at times. What really enhanced the overall experience were the strict rules of engagement and realistic boundaries the game put on you, further adding to the complexity of each encounter. This ain't Rambo where your job is to mow down everything that so much as farts in your general direction. No, you're part of the boys in blue, which means you have some bloody standards, goddammit. For about the first 10 hours or so, until you realize that the score at the end of each mission is entirely arbitrary, and you can just shoot first, plant evidence later, and play the game the way nature intended. Fortunately, the gear you're kitted out with is not only incredibly fun to use, but also rather interesting to experiment with and impacts your experience in fundamentally meaningful ways. Not only do the different assortment of attachments you decide to use matter, but even the choice of guns too. Having a sick-ass battle rifle with a bajillion different attachments might be the sickest thing you've ever seen, but that assessment feels completely different once you realize that weapon length affects turning inertia and maneuverability, and your dumbass took a fucking musket into a tight confined space with lots of twists and turns. The only double-edged sword in this regard is the fact that pretty much all of your weapons and attachments are unlocked right from the start. On the one hand, it's incredibly refreshing to be able to pick up and choose exactly what you want right from the get-go, especially since that's pretty much how real life works. But conversely, because there's no sense of progression and some guns are infinitely better than others, once you found a few that you really enjoyed, there wasn't really much reason to try any of the other weapons outside of a forced sense of personal obligation to. Regardless though, the game is fucking awesome to play, and I really wish more FPS games would use this style of gameplay rather than the TikTok COD shit we get so frequently nowadays. But despite how fun and crisp the action is, we unfortunately have to get the main controversy out of the way. Censorship. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that made it so good was how incredibly gritty and uncompromising the narrative was. Well, I lied. Sort of. You see, the sad reality is that the devs of this game are a bunch of spineless, opportunistic cowards with absolutely zero integrity or respect for their audience. They compromised big time. Ready or Not was marketed as and promised to be a disturbingly candid insight into the brutal, horrific, and depressing world that is SWAT policing. In fact, here's an official statement from them in 2021 about why they split with Team 17 and ultimately refused to censor the vision they had for the game. Now sure, you could make the argument that barring a very small handful of critical and contextually important moments, the censorship isn't that ham-fisted. But that's not the point, my guy. The issue is that as soon as a few more dollarinos were put on the table, Those corporate money-grubbing asshats decided that the promise and vision they sold their loyal audience was more of a theoretical one, and that censorship was actually okay if it came with the upside of guaranteed personal enrichment. And no amount of dogshit utilitarian arguments about how fun the game is going to change that. Yes, we're all happy you still enjoy it, but this isn't a question of is it fun. That's boring. It's about whether we should accept companies betraying artistic integrity and intent for the sake of profitability and scale. One of the reasons I find this especially egregious is because for the rest of the game that isn't censored, it genuinely does excel at creating an emotionally gut-wrenching experience. The environmental storytelling and overall tone of the game does an incredibly good job of confronting you with things we so often get to disassociate from in our daily lives. There were quite a few moments where I genuinely struggled to control my anger and disgust for the crimes I had witnessed, only to go full sicko mode on those assholes in a fit of sadistic rage. It's easy to dismiss vengeance and brutality as barbaric and obviously wrong, but once you're face to face with how brutally sick and twisted some people can be, that's when your resolve and conviction are really tested. And I mean, these are just pixels on a screen. There's no real harm to anyone here, so the fact that it can be as unsettling and disturbing as it is a testament to how well done the writing was. It's just sad that it's been watered down into a really good version of something other games could do, rather than a great version of something they were too afraid to try. Because these things do matter. If they didn't, why censor them in the first place? But storytelling and writing aside, there is one last thing to talk about. The core premise of the game is that of a hyper-realistic tactical simulator that forces you to play slowly and carefully. What it fails to mention though, is that the enemies that you're going to go up against were all secretly part of an undercover cloning program that used the DNA of Deadshot and Captain America to create the most stupidly unrealistic super soldiers ever witnessed. In what godforsaken world do untrained Goombas using pistols with iron sights snipe professionally trained policemen from like 60 yards away? Or how about casually using fucking sonar to echolocate your ass the second you decide to quietly peek through an open door? The AI of this game is probably the closest you'll ever get to the thrilling experience of a $200 sawdust enema. And what makes it so frustrating is that it often removes all sense of tacticality and agency from your side. Now I hear you thinking, well, if the enemy AI is so absurdly competent, surely your companions should also be sociopathic gigachad killing machines, right?
Right.
Not even close, baby. Between standing around like a bunch of dusty farts with their fingers up their ass while you're getting shot at, to constantly yelling like senile old men over and over again, completely ruining any semblance of the element of surprise, and even role-playing as Lydia from Skyrim with their incessant need to block your path at every fucking opportunity they get, these relish in the amount of frustration and anger they cause you. Look, this is a fun game, I won't argue. It fills a niche that virtually nothing else does at the moment, and the few games that are trying to are still in their growing phases. Meaning, if you have this specific itch, it's the only thing that's gonna scratch it. But at the same time, the devs so blatantly betraying their audience and showing their lack of integrity does make it a conflicting game to endorse. Personally, I bought it at like 50% off, as that was the absolute highest I was willing to compromise my values to experience it. And I strongly recommend you do the same too. I know most of you might only care about whether you're having fun or not, or strawman the other side is only wanting taboo things for the sake of being edgy. But it goes beyond that whether you're too full of shit to admit it or not. Because at the end of the day, there's really only one question left to ask yourself. If you're dismissive when studios betray their audience for things you don't care about, why should anyone give a fuck when they come for the things you do?